mature conifers, and as I wandered in through a gap between the trees and stumbled across this wall, kind of scrambled my way around it and decided it was a ruins of a house. The atmosphere of the place kind of got me, because it was sort of dapple shade, it was very green, covered in moss, very quiet, and I thought there's something special about this place, and it just kind of made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up just at that point.
So why is it that the trees were planted around a place where people once lived?
Forestry Commission acquired this land in 1947, directly after the Second World War, and were charged with getting a timber reserve onto the ground, and every inch of space that the Forestry Commission acquired at that time, trees were planted on, whether there was ruined settlements or not.
So once you discovered this place, what happened next?
Well, after discovery, we consulted a local archaeologist just to do a quick survey to see what or if else was on the site itself.
It's believed there may be other hidden sites in the forest, and it's now known that parts of this site date back to the 18th century. There's documentation to prove that the people who lived here at this time were victims of the clearances. It's etched in Highland history, and in some cases whole glens were cleared. Tens of thousands of people were evicted from their homes, sometimes violently. The crofters' livelihoods were sacrificed for the profits of sheep farming, and they were forced into a life of poverty. Many were left with no option but to emigrate to the colonies, carrying with them a feeling of betrayal by their masters, clan chiefs and English noblemen. Hector, what was going on this site then all those years ago?
Well, there were 6 households here, subsistence farming basically. We reckon the average size of the households were probably about 5 on average. So if there's 6 households here, you're talking about, 30 or 40 people living here. Where we're standing at the moment, behind you was a house, and behind me was a barn. Now I know they're just shapes in the ground at the moment, but it's those shapes in the ground that we are able to interpret from experience of excavations at other sites.
Another shape in the ground is the derelict remains of a corn kiln. This would have been used to dry corn with the heat from a fire. The rising warm air would pass through the stacked corn, and when dry, it was moved to the barn. There's also evidence that this site was used for sheep farming after the clearances. These remains are of a sheep frank or enclosure, where shepherds brought their animals in at night for safety.
Dengen reflects changes in land use. It was used on a much smaller scale. There was never more than 3 houses post-clearance. But eventually, Dengen was abandoned altogether. And the last occupant of this particular site was a gamekeeper in the cottage.
Now from a hidden village to a light show like no other. In a couple of weeks' time, the art collective NVA will be illuminating the streets of Glasgow in Scotland's first ever Festival of Light. And back in the summer, the NVA were creating their magic on the Isle of Skye, and Diane was there.
Skye, an island of rolling mists, majestic sea cliffs and craggy Jurassic rock formations.
This part of the Scottish landscape looks magnificent, even on an overcast day like today. But at night, as you can imagine, there really isn't much to see. Until now, that is, because hidden under that blanket of cloud are some clues to what I'm going to find later on tonight when I climb that mountain.
In the forest, on the slopes below the Old Man of Storr, there's enough equipment to unleash the UK's largest ever light and sound sculpture.
I love being in the woods on the side of the mountain, but I suspect that what we're seeing here today is going to look very different tonight.
Yeah, it will. We've basically hidden and masked a whole set of technologies in the woods. So there are various very subtle figures and shapes that we've made. We've worked a lot with materials from the woods, and you'll see various quite subtle sculptures which then bend and weave throughout the woods as you walk up. It's a nighttime walk over about 1,500 feet, quite steep, And really it's in praise of the Old Man of Storr and the geology and culture of this area. It is certainly one of the most unique areas in the UK, if not Europe or the world. I mean, it has a character all of its own.
And Anne, you're also part of tonight as well, aren't you? What do we expect from you?
I'm a singer, and I stand within the landscape and sing a number of the songs that I find reflect this landscape to me. They've either been written by people from the north end of Skye or written about the landscape.
What sort of impact has this had on the landscape?
We worked with all of the local heritage and conservation bodies to find a way that you could allow 10,000 people to enter this landscape without damaging it. So what we did was to design lighting systems which draw their power from huge batteries which are trickle charged during the day on tiny lines which are the same that would go into a household, and then run the lights for 3 hours and then switch off. They were helicoptered directly into position on specially built platforms so that we could, having done an analysis metre by metre of the whole site, we were able to position them in the exact places where we wouldn't damage the more fragile plants.
The next project, let me just challenge you with this, the next project is to try and find something to beat these midges.
Well,
they're just attacking us.
Sadly, we're not on the section of the route where we have our midge magnets. We've actually placed £20,000 worth of machines higher up the route. Sadly, we're not stood next to one of them, but we have actually tackled the midges higher up the route.
You've thought of everything, haven't you? Okay,
We've done our best.
I'm going to get ready for tonight. Thank
All
you
right.
both very much.
See you later.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. As darkness falls across Skye, the walkers start to arrive at the foot of the hill. Before any of us set off, the guides give us a briefing and some idea of what to expect.
And if I could ask people to stay on the path because of the whole ecology of the place and the sensitivity of the area.
No one's quite sure about what they're going to see and hear. It's been described as an installation, a sculpture, or simply a light show, but it promises to be much more than that.
Enjoy.
As the gate opens, the first walkers head off into the darkness with a real sense of foreboding and excitement. Tonight, there are 180, but by the time the installation is dismantled, 10,000 people will have been through this experience. Well, I've seen where we're heading, just up there, the Old Man of Storr, and in this light, it's looking a bit spooky actually. I must watch my step. To begin with, it's simply a rocky path, but we soon start to hear eerie sounds drifting through the trees. Then, something starts to stir in the pine forest which surrounds us. Oh gosh, you need to see this. If you just look through the trees, there's sort of like glimpses of people. You're not quite sure, they're very sort of ethereal. Oh look, there we go, there's another one. They're all different shapes and sizes. Well, I'm just entering the lighted pathway, and this is where I've got to turn off my head torch, so don't know quite what to expect, but here we go. See you later. The only light we have is 2 illuminated strips along each side of the path. We've reached the steep bit, but surrounded by the sounds of Gaelic poetry and soundscapes from the Norwegian composer Geir Jensen, I'm hardly noticing the tough walking conditions. Well, right behind me, as close as I ever imagined I would be, is the Old Man of Storr, and I've still got a little way to go, so I'm going to get even closer, but I had to just stop and take in this awesome sight, and he's just sort of sitting there majestically in almost like this still life, but it's real life. The trail of walkers heading up the hill with our head torches is all part of the sculpture. Like a pilgrimage, our progress is slow but relentless. Eventually, we reach the huge natural amphitheatre beneath the Old Man of Storr, and the installation really comes to life. In the distance,
On a mountain ledge, a dancer gyrates and contorts while German and Gallic poetry booms out through the darkness. There's a sort of ethereal quality about being here, and it's the most gentle, beautiful light show. And the only way I can really describe it is sort of like theatre in the heavens. It is quite extraordinary. But I won't get too settled here because we have to head down. There's more to see. The walkers snake quietly down, their head torches glinting in the dark. It's late now, well past 2 in the morning, but as we round the corner halfway down, it seems the show isn't quite over. Doesn't that sound exquisite? Well, remember Anne, who I was speaking to earlier on? That's her singing a traditional Gallic song. When we reach the foot of the hill, there's a real buzz of excitement.
Climbing a mountain in the dead of night, I mean, it's just an absolutely different experience. And it's something that not many people get to do.
The thing I like walking up in the dark is the fact that you smell things that you might not necessarily notice during the day, such as the pine needles, and you tend to be hearing things as well. You can't rely on your peripheral vision anymore, especially with the head torch on.
I think it's putting sound and light into an environment that you would never expect them to be there in the first place.
The next day, and without much sleep under my belt, I'm out to meet Callie, the crofter who owns the land where it all happens. He's lived here all his life, and he's not a man used to high art on his doorstep.
What was your first reaction when you were told that, you know, the mountain would be transformed by light and sound, there'd be a lady hanging off the side of the mountain? What did you think of all of that?
Well, I think I was very excited at the time. I didn't think maybe the project would come to fruition, and I didn't maybe think that it would be as spectacular as it is. But yeah, at the time it sounded good, and I encouraged him. I would hope I encouraged him anyway to go ahead with it.
Is this something that you'd like to see next year and maybe as a regular thing?
I think this might be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but yeah, I would certainly maybe another location. They might plan to do another location, but I think this will be once in a lifetime here.
With its natural beauty, Skye already attracts visitors from all over the world. But now, with the prestige this artwork has brought to the island, its profile is even higher.
Climbing the store in the dark of the night has been such a privilege. My senses have been exhilarated, challenged and inspired. In fact, what I saw last night, for me, has added a whole new dimension to its natural beauty.
Diane having a great night out at the light show on Skye. And here on the banks of Loch Ness, Urquhart Castle, the top tourist attraction in the Highlands, looks pretty spectacular itself when night falls. One of the first people known to have visited this site back in the year 580, long before the castle was built, was St. Columba on one of his missionary trips from Iona. Well, today, about 250,000 people a year come to Urquhart Castle to admire the splendid ruins. It's one of the few places from where you can get great views both up and down the loch. So, in more warlike times, it was an ideal spot to build a castle. So why is it such a big attraction, do you reckon?
It's the location. It sits out in the middle of Loch Ness, which is one of the most famous stretches of water in the world. People come here to let their imagination run riot.
And are some of them surprised to discover it's a ruined castle?
Yeah, it had a very turbulent history. It's bound to have been a ruin during its years. It was left unoccupied for 200 or 300 years before it came into the care of the state, and we've just been stabilising it ever since. It's never the Historic Scotland's intention to put a roof back on something that's ruined.
But you have established a very impressive new visitor centre cut into the hillside over
Yes, that was opened 4 years ago. It's got a gold award under the Green Tourism Business Scheme, very energy efficient, and we try and be as ecological as possible there in the whole site.
What kind of funny stories do you hear from visitors?
Oh, they're legion. You could write a book about them. The American that wanted to know why we built the castle so far away from the parking lot. And it's always quite fun to sort of tell people that the castle was built by an Englishman, didn't know any local builders, so he employed a firm from London and paid them before they'd finished, and that's why it's in the state it is now. They believe you as well.
The true story is that though Urquhart Castle was fought over several times, in 1692 its occupiers destroyed it, so it could never be captured again. In a few minutes' time, we'll be finding out what the weather's going to be like for the week ahead. But right now, it's over to Adam, who's made a few new friends.
Well, I certainly have, John, and although I'm sitting here amongst a group of wild boar piglets having a great time, I'm about to investigate the latest project of the Forestry Commission here in Glenafric. And it involves trying to restore this kind of landscape, Caledonian pine forest. But frustrating their plans, because it leaves no room for the pine seeds to thrive, is this stuff, bracken. Wild boar could be the solution because they till the soil, killing the bracken and letting the trees grow.
Forestry Commission Scotland are happy to support the project to see what effect the boar have on ground disturbance, so that the native Caledonian Scots pine can regenerate into the ground afterwards, and also to see if there's any financial benefit to local communities. It's a very natural way to disturb the ground and a great way to blend that sort of pig farming with restoring the natural environment.
Now, bracken seems to be the main problem. How did it become so well established?
Bracken's a problem because it's so invasive and it really takes out all of the shade and the nutrients from the ground and prevents the trees from germinating and becoming established themselves.
In charge of these natural tilling machines is Liz Balharry. She looks after the pigs and the area they live in, as well as keeping an eye on how the experiment's going. So Liz, how did you set things up then?
Well, to start with, we had test plots. We had them in just about half hectares, and we found that we got good results, especially on the bracken, but we thought they were a bit too hard on the trees, and we wanted to have them more, a little bit of rooting here and a little bit there, not the whole lot gone. So we've put them into a bigger area now, about sort of 5 hectares.
And this is where they've been doing their digging?
Yes, and this is where they've been rooting about. And what they're looking for here is bracken rhizomes, or the underground stems. And here we have one here, and it's got you can see the white bits on it, and that's the store of starch. And what's happening at this time of the year is that all the energy is coming out of the leaves or the fronds and going into the underground store. And that's what the pigs are after, that's what they're eating.
And so once the boar have chomped on this and chewed it up, that means dead bracken and making way for the young saplings?
That's certainly, that little bit will be dead. And because they're working away in a lot of it, then lots of it will be dead.
And are there any examples where you can see the difference then?
In the test plots, it's quite clear. On one side of the fence, we've got like 2 metre high bracken, great big swathe of it, and on the other side, there's all the bracken is gone. It's all been knocked down and all the ground's been rooted up.
Liz has 4 plots to look after, covering 20 hectares. 2 pens have piglets in, while the others house a boar named Boris and some sows. Liz, he seems very friendly and hardly wild.
Yes, he's very gentle, very placid. But then you see we feed him, and he knows nothing bad from people at all. A wild boar in the wild would be a lot more wary of you.
And you do have to have a special licence to keep these animals, don't you?
Yes, you do, because we no longer have wild boar free living in Britain anymore. They're on the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, and you have a licence to hold them.
So how have the local community taken to having a dangerous wild animal up in the woods then?
Well, they've been up, a lot of the local people have been up to see them, and they can see for themselves that they're not dangerous and they're not wild. And of course we have the fencing to keep them in. And we've had a lot of interest locally, and we've actually had school groups coming up to see them.
The wild boar have an incredible sense of smell and expect to find their food at ground level, so constantly till the soil, creating an ideal seedbed for trees.
Once the tree seeds germinated and the little trees coming up, the pigs tend to just leave it alone. I mean, they might root it out because they're rooting around in that patch, but most of the time they'll just walk by them and ignore them, which is very different to deer, for example, which are real browsers, and they'll pick at, particularly like rowans, like this one here. They'd love that, and they'd browse off the leaves and the shoots. But the pigs, no, they don't. They might eat it, but they might not, and the chances are they'll leave it alone.
Here, the battle between man and nature will probably never end. For the time being, though, the Forestry Commission in Scotland is providing the troops that maintain the Caledonian pines.
Over 90% of our native woodlands have been lost, and it's really very, very important that we concentrate on restoring the woodlands in places like Glen Affric here, and we really want to do that in the most friendly way that we can and let nature take its course with as little management intervention as possible.
The Wild Boar project is set to run for 3 years, but will it work to reinstate the Highlands' natural environment?
It's early days yet because we're just a year into it. And if we get the results that we're looking for, that the boar are good for the trees, then maybe we can grow on from here. Maybe keep them in a bit longer, maybe expand our test areas. But it all looks quite promising at the moment.
Now, in a few minutes, John will be joining a group of people who have clubbed together to buy their own...
Well, here we are, still on the banks of Loch Ness, and I'm on my way now to meet some people in the scattered community of Abreacon. There's no post office there, no shop, no pub, but what's helping to keep the community together is the fact that they've gone out and bought themselves a forest. Just a handful of families had to raise £150,000 to purchase the former Forestry Commission plantation, and they did it by persuading various bodies to give them grants. And how did it all happen? I mean, did somebody say to you, as a village, would you like a forest?
Well, we didn't set out to own a community woodland. That wasn't our aim. What we were trying to do was to protect public access rights to the woodland, which had traditionally been common grazing and peat cutting areas.
This is way before Scottish land reform, I understand. We were sort of ahead of the game there in that access. Could have been denied. Gates could have been padlocked. And the
what was the
reaction?
Amongst people here when the forest was offered?
I think people thought it was a pretty crazy idea. How could a small community of 120 people buy 1,200 acres of forest? But the more we worked at it, the more it became doable, and we were able eventually to get things together and raise the money, and here we are.
And have you got this forest forever now?
As long as we're happy to work it, we've got it. It's ours.
We own it, and we've got a 60-year management agreement with Scottish Natural Heritage, so they're agreeing everything we do that it fits their criteria, and their aims match very well with our aims, so it's a very natural partnership.
Right. During the 5 years the village has been running the forest, it's been opened up to everyone with miles of paths and tracks, and children have been encouraged to make it their own. As an outdoor classroom, it's being used to the full, and local school students work here as part of their course on rural skills. By next spring, they'll have helped build a mountain bike trail. The forest is a success now, but buying it wasn't easy.
In fact, right up towards the deadline when the money had to be handed over, they were £20,000 short, and it looked like the whole thing was going to fall through. And that's actually when SNH came forward. We offered that shortfall, so we gave them £20,000 at the time, which meant they could put the offer in, and the whole thing was signed, seen, delivered.
And maybe there are lessons to be learned here. I mean, this could be a prototype for other villages with forests on their doorstep.
Well, I think it is, yeah. I mean, I think it just shows what a community can do when they pull together, when they work in partnership with the public agencies, when they buy a piece of woodland like this. I mean, it's a great demonstration about what's possible.
In the past 5 years, the villagers have really been sorting out their forest. They've got rid of about 200,000 trees, low-grade, non-native species like pines, and in their place, they've planted 300,000 new ones, Scots pines and birch and cherry, trees like that. They've also created 7 part-time jobs, and the books look pretty impressive.
By the end of the year, investment will have topped £2 million. The 25,000 tonnes of timber harvested will have brought in more than £400,000. Andrew Macmillan is a part-time forester, but he also runs a croft nearby. Because he can't make a full-time living from his sheep and cows, he had to work on oil rigs for weeks on end, until the job in the forest came along.
They give me a list of jobs to do, and so long as it's done, they leave me to do it. If I need to be off for lambing, I can be off for 3 weeks at a time and they won't say a word to me. But I can work 7 days in the forest as well to make up for it later on. It works out swings and roundabouts. It's whichever suits me best, it works out, you know.
Different members of the community, different ages, use it in different ways, and they use it in the way they want to use it. So we do have our mountain bikers, and we do have our scramblers and our quad bikers, but we also have our grannies taking the dog for a walk every morning, and it's all sitting very comfortably together at the moment, I have to say.
A forest that was almost dead is now full of life, and the new growth has brought much better prospects to a very small, very rural community.
Well, that's it from us here on the banks of Loch Ness. But don't forget, you can find all the details of today's programme and how to get one of these, the Countryfile calendar, on CFAX page 616 or the Countryfile website.
There's no programme next Sunday because BBC One cameras will be at the Cenotaph for Remembrance Sunday. But we'll be back in 2 weeks' time, so until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.
And when we come back, we'll be in Sheffield, looking at the countryside on the city's doorstep. And tomorrow, Radio 4's Farming Today reports on the £1 billion given out in grants to rural projects over the last 5 years and asks if it's money well spent.